My name is Rachel Martin. I'm 34 years old. I live in Houston, Texas, and for the past 8 years, I worked at a small private logistics company called Turner Freight Solutions. We had one office, around 60 employees, and we all knew each other by name. I wouldn't say I was building a career, not really. I was just doing my job. I love order, numbers, clean balances. I know that probably sounds boring, but to me, it brought peace. My accounting department was quiet, and I liked it that way. No interruptions. Every day the same steady rhythm. 9 a.m. coffee from the machine. 12:30 turkey sandwich in the break room. 5 o'clock head home. My title was financial analyst. My salary was $71,000 a year. I paid the mortgage on my small house on the edge of town, saved for retirement, and flew to Austin twice a year to visit my younger sister and my niece. At our company, it was common to say, "Turner is a family." And you know what? At first glance, it felt that way. Every Christmas, they took us to an amusement park in Galveston. On Thanksgiving, we had a full office lunch with turkey and pumpkin pie. The CEO, Mr. Avu, and RTA 10, Hayes, would walk around the office himself with a tray, pouring cider. He was charming, always smiling. He liked to say, "You are the heart of this company. We're not a corporation, we're a team." Employees looked out for each other. Baby showers were held in the conference room. People brought in home-baked cookies to the kitchen. I wasn't the life of the party, but I felt part of something steady. And that was enough for me. Sometimes I'd catch myself thinking that all of it felt like a scene from an old-school sitcom where the office is almost home and coworkers are almost friends. I even started staying a bit later on Fridays to help close out reports. It felt right. It felt normal. Life moved along quietly. No drama, no crises. In our line of work, there was no room for creativity, risk-taking, or flashy moves. Everything by the book. Everything in the spreadsheet. Each month, I reviewed the invoices, P&L statements, tax reports. Everything balanced, always. I wasn't chasing promotions. I didn't dream of being CFO. I didn't strive to be a leader. All I wanted was stability. After some hard years in my early 20s, a rough family, a painful breakup, a breakdown, I had finally found a place where I felt okay. Turner Freight was my quiet harbor. I didn't want anything to change. I trusted these people. I believed we really were a team. What I didn't know was that soon, that trust would be put to the test. That the smiles from upper management were just a facade. That behind the family atmosphere was something else, something that would force me to choose. Stay honest or stay employed. And that's where it all began. It all started with a new deal. One morning, sometime in March, our director, Mr. Hayes, gathered everyone in the conference room and cheerfully announced, "We've just signed the biggest contract in the company's history. We're going national. Big changes are coming, the good kind." He called it a new chapter. Suddenly, we had clients from Las Vegas, Florida, New Jersey, all with large shipping volumes. Of course, we weren't Amazon, but for a company like ours, the numbers were significant. At first, I was genuinely excited. Growth is good, right? More work, maybe bonuses. I was ready to step up. But along with the increased activity in the system, something strange began. I first noticed it while reviewing the April transactions. The reports started showing multiple transfers, same amounts, 2 or 3 times a week with different descriptions, but to the same accounts. Payments of $18,000, $22,500, even one for $35,000, all labeled as external consulting. But when I checked the folder for those consulting contracts, there was nothing. No agreements, no documentation, no email trails. I walked over to Carl from legal, a calm, straight-laced guy. I asked, "Hey, Carl, have you seen any contracts for these consulting payments?" He looked at the screen, shrugged, and said, "They just gave me a list and told me not to ask questions. It's faster that way." Then he added, "Rachel, if you want to sleep well, don't get involved. Just do your part." That line stuck with me. Just do your part. But the thing is, my part is making sure everything adds up, making sure things are transparent and compliant, and I couldn't unsee it because the numbers were starting to scream. At one point, I noticed a duplicate payment, same amount, $22,500 just 3 days apart. Both transfers went to a company called Greencrest Consulting LLC, registered in Delaware. No one in the office seemed to know who they were. I sent an email to the finance team asking for confirmation on the purpose of the payments. No reply. Not the next day. Not the day after. When I brought it up in a team meeting, my manager, Lauren, waved it off. That's coming from the executive level. New partnership channels, not your lane. Not my lane? I decided to check for myself. Through public business registries, I looked up Greencrest. There was almost nothing, just a P.O. box and a nominal owner. It looked exactly like what it probably was, a shell company. And that's when I felt that sinking twist in my stomach. I remembered an old business ethics lecture from college where the professor said, "If you're in accounting and you see duplicate transactions without support, run, or be ready to be questioned." But I didn't want to run. I wanted to understand. Because if I started ignoring this like the others, I would stop being me. The office, meanwhile, had grown strangely quiet. Everyone carried on as if nothing was happening. Jenna, the receptionist, whispered to me one afternoon, "You're not the first to ask questions, but you're the first not to get scared and actually say it out loud." That's when I realized, if I kept going, there'd be no turning back. But staying silent wasn't an option either. Because when you see something dirty, you either look away or you look up and say, "I see it." I chose the second. The next day, around 10:30 a.m., my work phone rang. The screen showed an internal number labeled Director's Office. I felt my stomach tighten instantly. My gut told me this wasn't just a casual check-in. This was going to be something important. I picked up. "Rachel Martin." "Hi, Rachel. This is Karen at the front desk. Mr. Hayes would like to see you. Is now a good time?" Of course it wasn't. I could barely breathe. But I said, "Yes, of course. I'm on my way." Mr. Hayes' office was in the far corner of the building with a panoramic view of downtown Houston. A massive black glass desk, a chair that looked more like a throne, walls covered in conference photos, awards, certificates. He looked up when I walked in and smiled broadly. "Rachel, come in, have a seat. How are you?" His voice was warm, enveloping, almost caring. "I'm well, thank you," I replied, sitting on the edge of the chair. He reached for a glass water bottle, poured himself a drink, and then, almost offhandedly, said, "I've been reviewing the reports. You're doing excellent work, very detail-oriented." I nodded. I didn't understand where this was going. He continued, "With our new partnerships, there are a few things that need to be smoothed out. Perfectly normal practice, just some formalities. Sometimes what's on paper doesn't reflect the full picture. You know what I mean?" I felt a cold sweat forming on my hands. "I'm not sure I understand what exactly you'd like to adjust," I asked, trying to stay calm. He made a casual wave of his hand like brushing away air. "A few lines in the quarterly report. Some transfers need to be reworded or renamed. For example," he turned his monitor slightly. "This could be marked as operational expenses or contractor services. It's not a lie. It's simplification. Helps the report read better." I stayed silent. And he just kept smiling. "You're with us on this, right, Rachel? There's nothing criminal here, it's just corporate strategy. Sometimes bureaucracy requires flexibility. You're with us." Those words felt like a test of loyalty, a challenge. My chest tightened. I suddenly remembered him making a toast at the company party about family, about trust, about shared goals. And in that moment, I realized he wasn't asking. He was demanding. And I had a choice to make. I gathered my courage. My voice trembled slightly, but I said, "Mr. Hayes, I respect this company, but I can't make edits that aren't backed by documentation. I need proper support for any changes." He didn't answer right away. His smile froze. His eyes narrowed. "Rachel, let's not make a big deal out of nothing. This is just business. Everyone does it." I shook my head again. "I understand, but I can't work that way. I'm sorry." Silence. He pulled his hands off the desk, leaned back, and stared out the window, then said, "All right, think about it, go back to work." I left the office with shaking hands. Everything outside that door suddenly felt louder, ringing phones, clacking keyboards, voices. But inside me, there was only one thing: dread. Low, cold dread. I knew now they'd be watching. I had made myself inconvenient. I had refused to be one of them. But deep down, I felt something else too. Doing the right thing isn't always comfortable. Sometimes it's just necessary. That evening, I went out to dinner with my friend Lauren. We meet every couple of weeks, usually reserving a table at a small Mexican restaurant in the Heights neighborhood of Houston. It always smells like lime, fried tortillas, and something warm and comforting like home. But that evening was different. I barely touched my food. I just poked at my salad with a fork and kept fidgeting with a napkin. "You're not eating," Lauren said, pouring me some water. "Talk." I exhaled. Hayes asked me to tweak the reports, make a couple of strange transfers look normal. Operating expenses. "You're kidding?" "Number. And it looks like this isn't the first time, I just didn't notice before." Lauren lowered her eyes. Then she looked straight at me. "So what are you going to do?" I shrugged. Tears were welling up in my eyes. "If I don't do it, I'll get fired. But if I do, that's not me. That's not the Rachel who's always tried to do the right thing. I just don't know." She placed her hand on mine. "You know what I think? It's better to stay true to yourself without a job than to go to sleep every night knowing you betrayed someone, especially yourself." I didn't say anything, but something stirred inside me, as if her words lit a fire that warmed what fear had nearly frozen in me. When I got home, it was almost 9. I pulled out a box of photographs I hadn't opened in years. There was an old picture of my father taken in 1979, the year he was fired from an auto plant in Detroit. He had refused to falsify a safety test for a new braking system. He knew that negligence could cost lives, so he said no. They fired him. After that, he worked as a handyman, a pizza delivery guy, a security guard. But he always repeated one phrase: "If your principles aren't worth a loss, then they're not principles, just convenient ideas." I stared at that picture for a long time. He was standing outside the factory building, holding a homemade sign. On it, written in black marker: "Truth costs. Pay it anyway." Truth has a price. Pay it. Always. That night, I barely slept. In my mind, the voices kept circling. "You're with us, right?" Hayes. "This isn't you, Lauren." And my father's steady gaze from the photo. In the morning, standing in front of the mirror, I looked at myself and seemed to ask, "Are you really ready to give up stability? The familiar paycheck? For what? For some abstract idea of honesty?" But it wasn't abstract anymore. It was me. My name. My signature on a report that could end up in court. My face, the one I'd see in the mirror afterward. My hands were shaking. Actually, shaking. I even spilled a little coffee on my blouse. But I wiped it off, put on my blazer, grabbed my bag, and drove to the office. And the only thought pounding in my head was, I'll say no, and whatever happens, happens. The day after my silent decision, it all began. I was sitting at my desk in the open-plan office on the 3rd floor. Through the window, I could see the parking lot and the little coffee shop where I got my oat milk latte every morning. Everything looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. At around 10:15, a message flashed on my screen, a call from Hayes. "Rachel, can you come to my office for a sec?" I went in, but Hayes wasn't alone. Trevor, his deputy, was already there. The door was closed. Their smiles felt forced, almost sugary. "Rachel," Hayes began, handing me a cup of coffee I hadn't asked for, "we're a little puzzled. You've always been one of us. But right now, don't you think it's time to align a bit more with the team?" I looked at them. Coldly, calmly. I didn't say a word. "You understand, right?" Hayes continued. "That if someone in accounting starts digging or, let's say, not cooperating, it could hurt all of us? Not just you. We're a family. And family sticks together." Trevor jumped in. "You don't want us all being audited over one extra report, do you? We need to move fast right now. Big clients, international contracts. I clenched my hands in my lap and stayed silent. Just say it. Hayes leaned in slightly. Do you think you're smarter than us? No, I replied. I just won't sign off on something I don't understand. He smirked. You see, Rachel, this isn't your business. It's not your money. You don't make the decisions. You just read the numbers. That's it. No one's asking you for moral judgment. You're not a court. You're not a team player. He said it almost in a whisper, with a faint smile like a diagnosis, like a brand. I felt something tighten inside me, but it wasn't pain, it wasn't fear, it was conviction. I stood up, carefully placed the cup on the table. You know, you're right. This isn't my business, but it is my signature, and my conscience. So, you're refusing? Trevor asked. His voice no longer sounded friendly. I nodded. I won't alter the report. A pause. Silence. Only the ticking of the digital wall clock. Hayes leaned back in his chair. All right, we'll take that into account. I walked out of the office. In the hallway, my heart was pounding like I'd just run a marathon. A colleague glanced at me, then quickly looked away. I didn't know what would happen next. Termination? Pressure? A complaint? Maybe all of it at once. But I knew one thing. I wasn't afraid anymore. I knew who I didn't want to be, and I knew who I had already become. After that conversation in Hayes' office, I knew there was no turning back. That evening, I opened my laptop at home and sat at the old wooden kitchen table, the same one where I used to help my daughter with her homework. I opened Google and typed, "How to report financial fraud SEC anonymously." Within an hour, I was reading through the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission's website, specifically the whistleblower program section. It all felt too official, too serious, and yet, exactly right. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a hero, I'm an accountant, but I know how to read numbers. And I knew if someone in Washington saw what I saw, it would make noise. The next day, I contacted Jane McDonald, a lawyer friend of a friend. She works in Chicago at a firm that specializes in corporate investigations. We met at a small cafe in Fulton Market. I told her everything I knew. Jane listened in silence, then carefully set down her cup. Rachel, do you understand how serious this is? Yes. Do you realize they might try to pressure you, intimidate you, fire you, even smear your name? I nodded. But if I stay silent, they'll just do it to someone else. I've seen junior accountants being told to fix the numbers. I've seen invoices going to shell companies in Delaware, no employees, no websites. This isn't just a gray area. We started gathering documents. I kept everything on a USB drive, hidden in the back pocket of an old leather briefcase. I copied emails, screenshots of Slack messages where Hayes asked us to round up the numbers, downloaded old reports from QuickBooks, piece by piece. The scariest moment was my final night in the office, when I realized I had to get the last bit of evidence. The office was almost empty. It was around 7:40 p.m. I told my coworkers I was staying late, need to reconcile a few accounts before month end. A lie and the truth at the same time. I put on headphones, pretending to listen to a podcast. Really, it was to hide the pounding of my heart. I opened an archived folder that contained internal emails between Hayes and the contracts department. I saw a file titled, Private Internal Guidance March 24 F3. I opened it. And there it was, a direct instruction. Adjust figures by end of week. Any discrepancies should favor the client. Screenshot. Quickly. Onto the flash drive. Another file, the previous quarter's report. It didn't match the one we submitted to the system. The numbers under consulting fees were inflated by almost $240,000. Another screenshot. Another folder. Close it. Double check. Clear history. When I closed my laptop, the office was completely dark. Just the lights from the parking lot reflected in the glass partitions. I exhaled and walked out. The next morning, Jane sent everything to the SEC through a secure channel. My name wasn't in the initial documents. But I knew, if there was an investigation, they'd find me eventually. But now I was ready. This was no longer just about a job. This was about not being part of a lie. And maybe, for the first time in my life, doing something that truly mattered. The next morning, I woke up at 6:12. My sleep had been broken as if my brain kept asking every minute, "Are you sure you did the right thing?" Yes, I was sure, but the fear, it was still there, quiet, like a single drop falling into an empty bucket. I got dressed like always. Beige slacks, light blouse, hair in a bun, minimal makeup. Everything inside me was trembling, but on the outside, calm, composed. I drove to the office down Lakeshore Drive, watching the sun slowly rise over the horizon. The city moved on, as if nothing had happened. When I walked into the building, Linda at the front desk greeted me. "Good morning, Rachel." "Morning," I replied, forcing a smile. The office seemed completely normal. Jason from IT was complaining about the coffee machine again. Carol from HR was discussing a television show with Matt from sales. In accounting, someone had turned on the radio something light, maybe Dave Matthews Band. I sat at my desk, turned on my monitor. Inhale, exhale, work. But inside, nothing felt normal. Every cell in my body was tense. It was like something was about to happen. The quiet, the normalcy. It felt wrong. Like I was in the middle of a movie scene, the one where the hero knows there's a bomb behind the door and everyone else is sipping coffee unaware. Every small movement seemed unnaturally peaceful. I kept catching glances not because anyone knew, but because I knew. It felt like I was carrying a secret under my clothes that had started to burn through my skin. Hayes walked past my desk around 11. He winked and said, "You're like clockwork. That's what I like to see." I smiled, nodded slightly, and stared at my screen again. 1 second, 2, 3. When he was gone, I realized I had stopped breathing. Everything inside told me, he doesn't know. Not yet. At lunch, I stepped outside just to walk around the building. The air was cool and fresh. People were walking dogs, sipping lattes across the street. I pulled out my phone. Jane had messaged, "The SEC received the files. You did the right thing. I'll update you if there's news." I didn't reply, just stared at the screen, then turned off the phone. When I came back, I noticed something strange. The conference room was unusually quiet. The glass walls had the blinds closed. They were never closed, but today they were. Around 3, a rumor began to spread. Some external auditors might be showing up next week. I overheard someone whisper, "Another audit? They say it's routine." I knew this wasn't routine. This was the beginning. But I said nothing. I worked. I stared at Excel. I answered emails. I sat in the open office like always. But inside, everything was screaming. That day, it felt like the silence before a storm. Everything looked in place. But the air was heavier, the light sharper. And deep down, you could feel it. Something was coming. And it was already at the door. It all started with silence. The kind that comes before an explosion. Normally, mornings in the office were filled with noise voices, typing, someone complaining about the weather. But on Tuesday, at exactly 9:17 a.m., the silence hit like a wall. I was at my desk, trying to focus on bank statements, when I heard a sharp metallic click by the entrance. The doors to the lobby opened. 6 people walked in. 2 wore sharp suits with SEC badges. The others were in IRS criminal investigation uniforms. One of them held a folder, scanning the room like he was reading the space. I froze. Every muscle in my body tensed. My hands turned cold like the blood had drained out of them. "James Hayes?" One of the agents called out loud, clear, emotionless. Hayes had just poured himself a coffee by the machine. He turned, smiled slightly. "Yes, that's me. What's this about?" The IRS officer stepped forward and said, "You are under arrest for suspected financial fraud, money laundering, and falsifying tax records. Anything you say can be used against you in court." Before Hayes could even move, his hands were in cuffs. The mug of coffee slipped from his hand, shattered on the floor, the liquid spreading like a stain. It all happened right in front of me. and everything around stood still. Someone gasped. Someone stood up in disbelief. Carol from HR covered her mouth. One of the junior analysts, Thomas, dropped his phone. Then they arrested Jerry Hayes' deputy, the same man who once told me, "This isn't your concern, Rachel, just do what everyone else does." An agent walked up to him and said, "Please stand up, you'll need to come with us as well." Jerry tried to object. "This is a mistake, I was just following directions." "We'll determine that," the agent replied curtly, snapping the cuffs into place. In the next few minutes, they escorted out two more, someone from legal, and one of the external consultants. One looked panicked, the other furious, but neither resisted. They knew it had begun. I sat in my chair, didn't move. I don't think I even breathed. It felt like a dream, or a scene from a documentary. Only it wasn't a film, it was my life. And then one of the SEC agents, a woman in her 40s with a steady, confident voice, walked up to me. "Rachel Green?" she asked. I nodded, slowly. She looked at me with a slight, respectful smile. No suspicion, no doubt. "Thank you. You made the right choice." I didn't know what to say. I just nodded again. Inside me a storm, relief, fear, shock, pride, exhaustion. All at once, all at the same time. The agents stayed for a while collecting documents, seizing computers, sealing file cabinets. The office was in a state of paralysis. Someone called the head of security. Others whispered in the hallway. And me. I just sat there, thinking, I did it. I didn't save the world. I wasn't on a battlefield. But I stopped something that once seemed untouchable. And even though I was still afraid, I knew this wasn't the end. This was the beginning. A day after the arrests, everything began to fall apart. Letters from legal, alerts from investors, emergency meetings. Some people quit on their own, others were let go. The office smelled like fear and decaf coffee. Rumors slithered between desks like snakes. They funneled money through fake consulting fees. It was all a kickback scheme. Word is, someone inside turned them in. I heard it. I felt the stares. Some thanked me silently. Others avoided me like I was contagious. But I didn't care about the stares. The company was cracking at the seams. Major clients pulled out. HR was frantically calling lawyers, trying to preserve some illusion of order. At some point, I was invited to a board meeting. One of the remaining execs said, "We'd like you to take interim control over financial compliance. People trust you. You're proof we still have a conscience left." I looked at him and stayed quiet. A couple of years ago, I would have said yes. I would have thought, this is it. Finally, they'll see what I'm capable of. But now? Now I looked at the charred walls of moral bankruptcy and realized, I don't want to be the one saving the ruins. I don't want to piece things back together after people who treated lies as policy and honesty as weakness. I said, I appreciate the trust, but I'm leaving. Not because I'm afraid, but because I've finally become the kind of person who won't sell herself for a salary and a boss's smile. As I walked out of the building, I ran into Jules, a young analyst I used to have lunch with. She looked at me and asked, "You were the one who started this, weren't you?" I nodded. She pressed her lips together and said, "Thank you. I thought nothing here would ever change." And in that moment, I realized, yes, the business was collapsing. But something important was being built. Not in the office walls. In me. Because I was no longer Rachel who was afraid to say no. I was the woman who chose to stay true to herself even when it was terrifying. And maybe I no longer had a title, a parking spot, or a branded company mug. But I had something far more valuable. I knew who I was. And I was proud of that. Several months passed after everything that happened. That time felt like the transition from winter to spring, long, difficult, but full of hope. I received several offers, but one stood out: a startup in San Francisco building its business on ethics, transparency, and social responsibility. They were looking for someone who not only knows how to crunch numbers, but who values honesty and treats it as their most important asset. When I signed the contract, for the first time in a long while, I felt relief. This wasn't just a new job, it was a new beginning. A few weeks later, I was invited to speak at a webinar in front of hundreds of listeners across the country. The topic was simple: integrity as a choice. I stood in front of the camera, in my cozy home office in Austin, Texas, speaking openly and honestly. Sometimes doing the right thing means standing alone. It might mean losing a job, friends. Comfort. But that's how you preserve yourself. You don't sacrifice your principles for someone else's gain. You choose to be honest with yourself and with the world. The words came easily because they were my truth. I spoke about how hard it is to resist pressure, how frightening it is to stand against a system that demands silence, but also about how important it is to know that your choice isn't just a refusal of convenience, but a path to inner peace. After the talk, dozens of people approached me, wrote letters and messages. Some thanked me for my courage, others confessed they were going through similar struggles. And it reminded me that I am not alone. That honesty and dignity aren't weaknesses, they are the strength that leads to true triumph. Today, I live peacefully. I don't bend to others' expectations. My days are full of meaning, and my work a joy. I know the choice was hard, but it's my choice, my path. And I don't regret a single second.